It was all an illusion. An odd thing for a man of supposed regard for objective truth to value. That had always been the cruel dichotomy. KGB had always been on the lookout for hard facts, but then reported those facts to people besotted with a dream, who then bent the truth in the service of that dream. When the truth had finally broken through, the dream had suddenly evaporated like a cloud of steam in a high wind, and reality had poured in like the flood following the breakup of an ice-bound river in springtime. And then the Politburo, those brilliant men who'd wagered their lives on the dream, had found that their theories had been only the thinnest of reeds, and reality was the swinging scythe, and the eminence bearing that tool didn't deal in salvation. But it was not so for Golovko. A dealer in facts, he'd been able to continue his profession, for his government still needed them. In fact, his authority was broader now than it would have been, because as a man who well knew the surrounding world and some of its more important personalities intimately, he was uniquely suited to advising his president, and so he had a voice in foreign policy, defense, and domestic matters. Of them, the third was the trickiest lately, which had rarely been the case before. It was now also the most dangerous. It was an odd thing. Previously, the mere spoken, more often shouted phrase, "State security," would freeze Soviet citizens in their stride. For KGB had been the most feared organ of the previous government, with power such as Reinhard Heydrich's Sicherheitsdienst had only dreamed about. The power to arrest, imprison, interrogate, and to kill any citizen it wished, with no recourse at all. But that too was a thing of the past. Now KGB was split, and the domestic security branch was a shadow of its former self, while the SVR, formerly the First Chief Directorate, still gathered information, but lacked the immediate strength that had come with being able to enforce the will, if not quite the law, of the communist government. But his current duties were still vast, Golovko told himself, folding the paper. He was only a kilometer away from Dzerzhinsky Square. That, too, was no longer the same. The statue of Iron Felix was gone. It had always been a chilling sight to those who'd known who the man was, whose bronze image had stood alone in the square. But now it, too, was a distant memory. The building behind it was the same, however. Once the stately home office of the Rossiya Insurance Company, it had later been known as the Lubyanka, a fearsome word even in the fearsome land ruled by Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, with its basement full of cells and interrogation rooms. Most of those functions had been transferred over the years to Lefortovo prison to the east, as the KGB bureaucracy had grown, as all such bureaucracies grow, filling the vast building like an expanding balloon, as it claimed every room and corner until secretaries and file clerks occupied the remodeled spaces where Kamenev and Ordzhonikidze had been tortured under the eyes of Yagoda and Beria. Golovko supposed that there hadn't been too many ghosts. Well, a new working day beckoned. A staff meeting at 8:45, then the normal routine of briefings and discussions, lunch at 12:15, and with luck he'd be back in the car and on his way back home soon after 6, before he had to change for the reception at the French embassy. He looked forward to the food and wine, if not the conversation. Another car caught his eye. It was a twin to his own, another large Mercedes S-Class, iceberg white just like his own, complete down to the American-made dark plastic on the windows. It was driving purposefully in the bright morning, as Anatoly slowed and pulled behind a dump truck, one of the 1,000 such large, ugly vehicles that covered the streets of Moscow like a dominant life form. This one's load area cluttered with hand tools rather than